right. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks to the Lunch Bunch for having me. Hello, my name is Deb. I'm a real alcoholic. Good to be with all of you. My sobriety date is March 15th, 1987, which I'm insanely grateful and sometime in awe of that. Amy, happy 1-year anniversary. That's awesome. I am here to tell you, you don't ever have to live through that first year ever again. Just stay with us. We've got a lot of work for you to do with other young women. So welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. I landed in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because I finally got caught. It is that simple. And when I got here, I didn't want to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want to have alcoholism. I didn't want to stay sober for the rest of my life. I heard you guys, you were saying 1 day at a time, but I knew that you meant for the rest of my life. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was a teenager and I looked at all the old people sitting in Alcoholics Anonymous and I was like, yeah, you can stay sober for the rest of your life because you got like 10 years left, right? But like, I've got like 70 years left and I know that you're telling me I cannot drink for 70 years. And I remember having that argument with the old timers who were fortunate enough to get me in their AA meetings very early on. And they would just shake their head. They're like, oh my God, we got to put up with her for another 70 years, right? Like, what an order. They couldn't go through with it. Anyway, thank God, right, that spiritual experiences do happen and that we do get better in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I am certain, looking at some of the faces on this screen, that not all of you were a joy when you got to Alcoholics Anonymous either. I'm pretty certain that some of you were probably a little bit rascally. I took my first drink of alcohol when I was 9 years old. I wanted to know what that stuff was in those dark little bottles and why it was so important in my house. My dad has a terrible case of alcoholism, and my mom was very dedicated to nagging him until he did not drink anymore. And so they're in constant conflict. My dad is angry all the time, whether he's drunk or sober. He is drinking every single day. He's really violent. He's really volatile. I do the same thing yesterday that I did. I do the same thing today that I did yesterday. Yesterday it was fine. For some reason today it's not fine. And it is just, my house is crazy. So when I'm a little kid, I was living my life on high alert. I mean, there are pictures of me with my shoulders attached to my ears, my little hands balled up in fists, and I just look ready. I was literally living life on the balls of my feet because I didn't know when I was going to need to duck, dodge, or just run out the door and hide until everybody calmed down or passed out, one or the other. And I didn't know that I was growing up in alcoholism. I really didn't. I just thought that my dad had a family so that he'd have somebody to hate. And I didn't, right? But my whole life was about surviving alcoholism. I didn't know anything. I just knew that him having that stuff in those bottles was really important to him. And it was really important to my mom that he never have it. And when I asked questions about what that stuff was, nobody would ever give me a straight answer. And so I just went out. I had my first drink because I was doing research, right? And I still do that today. I mean, honestly, if I call you with a question, if you would just answer me, that makes everybody's lives easier. Because if you don't answer me, I'm going to go do research. And sometimes it doesn't serve me or anyone else all that well. And that was certainly the case with alcohol. The night I had my first drink, it was my first drink, my first drunk, my first blackout. The next day was my first hangover. I mean, I just got the full experience from my first outing with alcohol. But here was the thing, guys. Alcohol solved the problem that I didn't know I had. I didn't know that I was terrified all the time. I didn't know that I was living life on high alert. I didn't know that I was holding my breath. But I have been holding my breath for 9 years. And the moment that I got enough alcohol in my system to feel the effect produced by alcohol, everything changed. And in my estimation, it changed for the better, period. My little shoulders came all the way off my ears and my little hands let loose and were no longer in fists, and I exhaled all the way. And I was like, oh my God, this stuff is amazing, right? It's amazing. No wonder my dad drinks so much, right? If it does this for him, of course he drinks every day. And my mom, she's probably the real problem. Right? Because if she wasn't nagging all the time, maybe he wouldn't drink all the time. And if he didn't drink all the time, he wouldn't be hitting us all the time. Right. And so all of a sudden in my 9 year, right, I'm 9, right? And so I'm reconfiguring the way I see the world the moment I drink alcohol for the first time. my perception of everything changes. And I made a decision after that very first night. I said, I'm going to drink as much of this stuff as often as I can. I mean, why wouldn't I? Right? It freaking worked. It worked. And that's what I set out to do. Guys, I rearranged everything in my life. I reevaluated every relationship in my life. If I was hanging out with little kids and their parents had a bar in their basement, I moved them into my inner circle. Right? If they came from a bunch of teetotalers who, went to a lot of church and had a lot of rules, I would hang out with them, but only at school if I had to keep up appearances. I mean, I literally rearranged every relationship and all of my movements so that I could get closer to alcohol. And when you're little, when you're young, when you're below the legal age to go buy it on your own, it's all about creating systems for access to alcohol. And my life, like when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and they were talking to me about the mental obsession that goes with drinking, that goes with alcohol, I had no problem with the mental obsession because all of my thoughts immediately became trained to, how am I going to increase my access to alcohol? How am I going to survive the effects that were produced in my life because of my drunkenness, right? It's all about getting it, drinking it safely, surviving it. My whole life became about consuming alcohol. I don't know when I crossed over that magical line where I actually developed the physical allergy to alcohol. I don't know when that was triggered in me. I'm guessing that it was triggered pretty early on because by the time I was 14 years old, I was drinking the clock round. By the time I was 14 years old, in order for me to be sober enough to show up to something where people would be paying attention to me, so I had to actually be sober, I had to go through a significant period of detox in order to be able to show up and be stable. And I'm 14 years old. So when did I cross over that invisible line? I don't know, but it was pretty quick. And my case of alcoholism set on me very, very fast, and it was significant. When I finally ended up in a treatment center when I was 15 years old in downtown Cleveland, and I ended up there because I got caught. I was born and raised in a really tiny little town right outside of Akron, Ohio, which is where I'm calling in from today, right? That hotel where Bill heard the tinkling of the glasses, that is about 3 miles from me in the Mayflower Hotel right downtown here. Anyway, the little town that I grew up in is about 15 minutes from here, right outside of Akron, and it had a population of about 5,000 people. Most of them came out of the hills of West Virginia when the coal mines started closing down, and they moved over to Ohio to get good factory jobs and hopefully in a union. That was always the goal, so that they could make a decent living. Anyway, my family was one of those families. My dad was one of 9 kids. They came straight out of the hills of West Virginia. My granddad was one of the founders of the Coal Miners Union. They moved into Ohio. They all got union jobs, and they were blue collar factory workers and living in this tiny little town. 8 of those 9 kids lived in that little town with a population of 5,000 people, which if you do the math and you think about all the cousins and second cousins and all that kind of stuff, it means I was related to the majority of the town. Right. And you just can't act badly for very long if you're related to the majority of the town. Right. Because there's always going to be somebody that you don't want to see you act badly. So it's amazing that I was able to stay out there and drink the way I was drinking. Right. Because I'm drinking round the clock to drink the way I was drinking for as long as I did. It's fascinating that I didn't get caught earlier than that. But get caught, I did. I have a sister. My sister is less than 2 years older than I am, right? And she and I mean, we look alike, sound alike. My mom used to dress us as twins when we were little. She's a little older, but I was a little bigger, a little taller, and so we evened out. Anyway, my sister did drugs and didn't drink. I drank and didn't do drugs. That way there's no conflict of interest between us. And we are just running the streets and running the scams, and I have her back and she has my back, and that's the way we're rolling. And it is, and it was a fascinating existence, right? My dad is drinking his face off. I'm drinking my face off. My sister's doing, her random stuff. My mom's trying to control all of us. We're just a mess. We're just a mess. Anyway, my parents finally divorced. We sat my mom down and we said, look, we know that you're staying for the kids and the kids are here to tell you that we're tired of getting beat all the time. We don't know why he hates us, but he does, and we got to go. And so my mom, they got a divorce. My mom, what that meant is that she had to get a couple of extra jobs because she had a full-time job, but she wasn't a member of the union. And so she made a lot less money. So she had to get extra jobs just to pay the rent and keep food in the cupboards. And my sister and I kind of had the run of the place. Anyway, I'm not going to walk you through how bad of a series of decisions we made that enabled us to get caught, but indeed it was a long series of bad decisions. We get caught, the cops get called, there's a raid and a bust, and I used to cross the tracks and drink with these people that I should have never known in the first place. But they were bad people who come to railroad towns and stay on the wrong side of the tracks for a reason. They were my daily drinking buddies. Because they didn't ask any questions, and there was always a fifth of vodka for me to be had over there, and I could rely on them to make sure that I had booze when nothing else was working. And anyway, so we make a plan. The plan goes badly. We are busted. My sister, she runs, so she's in juvie jail, and I am in trouble, and I end up with a date to go into a treatment center in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, on the Saturday after Thanksgiving in 1986, when I am 15 years old. And I do some recon. I don't know what this treatment thing is all about, right? But I got to figure it out because I'm not going anywhere if I don't know where I'm going and what's going to happen to me when I get there and all that kind of stuff. So I go and I do my recon, and I find this adult who had been in this treatment center, and they're like, yeah, they locked the adolescent unit, Deb. And I was like, what do you mean they lock it? And they said, once you go in, you're not getting out. And I was like, oh my God, like that means that I'm going to be completely sober. Right. It like the idea that I was going into treatment and somehow I was going to be able to sneak out of there at night and go have a drink here and there. Right. Because the idea of 100% like complete sobriety. No, thank you. Not interested. Absolutely not interested. I have been drinking too much for too long, and I am so full of shame and guilt. I can't breathe even when I'm drinking now. Right? The alcohol is no longer working. It's not delivering me from it. It's not delivering me from the heaviness of my life anymore. Not like it used to, because I'm just building more and more and more heavy. And I, goodness knows. I mean, I listened to some of you tell your stories, and you drank for 35 years before alcohol quit working. I drank for 5 and it abandoned me, like just, kicked me out on the side of the road. And, anyway, so this treatment center, I figure out that I'm going to have to be completely and utterly sober. And I am just not interested in that. I can't be sober and okay at the same time. I can't. It is a constant merry-go-round of all of the situations I put myself in, all the things that had happened. I am, no, thank you, not going. And so, and the thing, I think about this all the time. Like I have learned, right, if you're doing 12-step calls, that if you're going to intervene in the life of an alcoholic and convince them that today is the day for them to get sober, you better have a place that you take them to immediately, right? You do not give us time to consider our options or to come up with a secondary approach, right? You put us in the car, you drive us, you get us installed. And, if they're putting you through a medical detox, they get you medicated and you end up staying and, and then they have their way with you and maybe you get sober. Well, when I got caught, they gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I mean, I am a planner. I'm still a planner. I make a lot of money being a planner today. I am a planner. And so I am doing, and I can't figure out a way to get out of this. Right? I am drinking the clock round. I can't figure out a way to get out of it. I can't hold a linear thought. And I just said, you know what? I'm really freaking tired. I mean, tired. You guys remember that kind of bone weary tired when you feel like you could sleep for about 3 years? I was that kind of tired at 15. And I just decided that I was like, I don't want to get sober. Not interested. So I decided I'm going to drink myself to death. And so I set out to do that. And those people on the wrong side of the tracks who didn't ever ask any questions, they didn't think that it was unusual when I was asking for extra bottles. And I went on a run unlike any other run. And I came to in that treatment center on the Monday after Thanksgiving in 1986. And I had checked into that treatment center on Saturday morning. They didn't believe that adolescents were real alcoholics, so they didn't put me through a medical detox. They just put me in a room where everything was bolted to the floor with a set of hospital pajamas, and they let me shake it off. It took me 10 days to become constitutionally capable of sitting upright and keeping water and oatmeal down. I was a very, very sick kid. Anyway, in that treatment center, it's 10 days of assessment, right? Where they figure out if you have alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever it is your parents think is wrong with you. And if they decide that indeed you do have that, you know, your little chart gets stamped with whatever is you're diagnosed with, and you go downstairs and then they keep you for 30 days of treatment. Oh, well, by the time I come out of that blackout, I had already told them the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God, right? Which was not the plan, of course, because I always have a lie that I'm going to share with you rather than the truth. But I had told them the absolute truth, and my little chart had alcoholic stamped on the front of it, and I am headed downstairs for more time, right? And I don't want to be there anyway. But I go downstairs on day 10 to start my inpatient treatment. They call a code and all the counselors go running back upstairs, and somebody's causing a big ruckus up there. And I grabbed one of them and I said, what's going on? And he looked at me and he said, your sister's here and she's unhappy. And what they had done is they had tricked my sister. My sister thought that she was coming to the treatment center to visit me because we had been separate and apart for 10 days. And what had really happened is that not only had I told them exactly what I had been up to, but I must have mentioned a little something about what my sister had been up to. They called my ma at home and they said, yeah, you got another one. Let us get this one through the initial 10 days and then you bring the other one in. And so my sister thinks she's coming to visit me and she's not. She gets onto that unit, the door closes and locks behind her. They toss her own set of hospital pajamas and she tore the place apart. She was so unhappy. And every day or two, they would call another code and have to go back upstairs because my sister and I said the way we were raised, there are a couple of things you have to learn by the time you're 6 years old. One of them is how to play euchre, which is an Ohio card game, right? You learn how to play euchre by the time you're 6 because sometimes the adults get real drunk and you have to fill it. And you also learn how to hold a grudge. That's what we called resentments. It's holding a grudge. And you learn how to hold a grudge. And if you forgive someone that you used to hold a grudge against, that would get you a sit down with your parents. Because once a grudge is set in place, it is not to be abandoned. It is not. That is a sign of weakness, right? And if you can't commit to that, well, you probably can't commit to anything else. And so you're kind of worthless, right? So this grudge holding is a significant item. And you learn how to do it because you have to have basic skills to go to kindergarten, right? So we got those. And so my sister now, 10 days in, her little chart has drug addict stepped on the front of it, and she comes downstairs to start her inpatient treatment program too. I am now sober 20 days in a locked unit against my will. My sister comes downstairs. She is now clean for 10, and she has a grudge against me because apparently it was my information that got her locked up in this treatment center. So I am doing everything I can to convince my sister to forgive me. I am learning nothing about alcoholism, nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, nothing about staying sober. I don't care about all of that. I'm just there doing my time, right? I treat treatment like jail. I am just there to check my boxes. You can't keep me beyond the insurance money running out. And I know that. I'm not sure how I know that, but I know that. So the time runs out. My time is up. I am trying to convince my sister to forgive me. She will not speak to me, right? Because the grudge holding, it's a skill, right? She's got it. No speaking to me. I'm getting on the elevator to leave. My sister grabs me and she said, you do not relapse until I get out of here. You will wait for me. You go home and you get my stuff and you get your bottles and you wait. I will be out of here in 10 days. If you relapse without me, I will never speak to you again. So I go home, I get my bottles, I get her some random baggies of this and that. I put it in the floorboard, which is where we hide all of our stuff, right? And I wait for 10 days for my sister to get home from treatment. I have no intention of staying sober. None. Zero. I'm not going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not doing anything that anybody suggested to me. I'm not interested, right? I cannot breathe. My shoulders are back on my ears. I'm back to living life on high alert. I get it. I've been drinking a little too much. Clearly, I'm going to back off a little bit. I just give me the fifth, but I'll keep the cap, right? I won't throw the cap away. I mean, honestly, I'm sure we can meet in the middle, but I am not going to give up drinking all the way. I can't. Not interested. So I'm going to scale back. I'm going to control my drinking, right? Because that's something I really hadn't tried before. Because when you're an adolescent, right, if you have alcohol, you drink it. because you could get caught and then they could take your alcohol at any time, right? So there's no, having a couple of drinks after school or, take the edge off or, none of that. Anyway, so my sister gets home and I run her upstairs and I lift the floorboard. I show her everything that I got. And I was like, oh, thank God tonight we're relapsing. Like I have been sober for 50 days against my will, 50. It's a long time to be sober when you don't want to be. Right. And she looks at me after she looks and sees everything that I've gotten. And she says, well, we're not going to relapse. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I had a thing happen and the counselor said I had a spiritual experience and we're going to stay sober. And I said, no, we're not. We're not staying sober. We're relapsing tonight. And she said, no, I had a thing happen. And they said it was a spiritual experience. We're going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't even drink. She said, I know, but they said NA sucks. So I have to go to AA. I said, I'm pretty sure that's not how this works. And she said, we're going to AA and we're going to stay sober. And I said, I'm not. I'm drinking. And she said, if you do, I'll tell. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening to my life right now? And so off we go to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? My ma drops us off 15 minutes before the meeting starts. My cool card is officially gone. I stand outside long enough to be late. All of the meetings around Northeast Ohio, even still today, they're all held in church basements. Many of them had concrete floors and metal folding chairs, which I just loved because when you drag a metal folding chair across a concrete floor, it makes a lot of noise, right? And I didn't want to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was blaming all of you somehow, right? Because it's got to be somebody else's fault, right? And so I'm going to punish all of you because I'm now in AA, right? So I'm going in late. I'm dragging my chair. I don't even like coffee, but I have 3 cups at every meeting. I mean, up, down, up, down, up, down. We're still smoking cigarettes in AA meetings 35 years ago, right? And so, I mean, the smoke is so thick in there, you can't really see anybody anyway. And I don't smoke when I get to AA, but I learn, right? Because you got to fit in. And so I'm sitting in AA meetings and I'm bumming cigarettes from people like in my regular indoor voice, like I'm using right now to give this pitch, right? I'm sitting there in the middle of the meeting. I'm like, hey, buddy, you got to smoke? I mean, and I'm leaving every meeting early. And I'm going to meetings in and around the Akron, Ohio area where they take their AA a little seriously. And the president of Alcoholics Anonymous, his name was Mac Shadburn. Mac Shadburn was super old and he'd been sober since Christ was a child, right? And he ran Alcoholics Anonymous. And his nemesis in the meeting, her name was Jane. Jane sat in the front of the room, Mac sat in the back of the room, and the two of them ran Alcoholics Anonymous. They absolutely ran it. Right? And you couldn't get into or out of the room without passing by Mac. And Jane sat right up front by the speaker. And she was one of those that would look at you with that look that would stop you cold if you were acting badly. But she was also that old timer who actually took a genuine interest in the lives of others. I mean, fascinating, right? She would remember that you had a job interview and would remember to ask you how it went. Right? You would tell her that you got invited over to your daughter's house for Sunday dinner after 16 years of not being allowed to darken the door. And she would make sure that you had a side dish to take so you didn't show up empty-handed. She's that old timer, right? And I never went anywhere near Jane, right? Because I mean, I can be rejected from anybody. I'm not going to wait on a line to be rejected, right? Because I knew I wasn't staying and I knew I was acting badly. And I was just there long enough to wait for my sister to relapse with me. And this is how I went to Alcoholics Anonymous for a couple of months. They suffered me. They really did suffer me. And one night I am sneaking out of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm literally sliding down the back wall, right? And I bumped into something. I'm looking this way, trying to find my sister to tell her, hey, it's time for us to go, right? Because I don't ever stay through the Lord's Prayer because I don't know the words. I'm not going to get in your circle. I wasn't raised in church. I wasn't raised with a relationship with God. I wasn't taught how to pray. I didn't know any of the Bible stories. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I'm not going on time because, you open with the Serenity Prayer and I'm not staying long enough for the Lord's Prayer. There's a lot of words in the Lord's Prayer. So I'm leaving early and I'm sliding down the back wall and I'm looking for my sister and I bumped into something. I turned to see what I bumped into and Mac had gotten up out of his chair and he was standing in the doorway with his arms folded, looking at me over top of his little reading glasses. And he just looked at me and he said, get in the circle. And I just looked at him and he went like this. And so I went in the room and I got in the circle. And as soon as the prayer was over, I went to leave and Mac was still standing in the doorway. And he just looked at me and he said, are you alcoholic? And I gave him the only answer that I had. And he said, can you control your drinking? And I was like, man, I've been looking for an opportunity to try, right? Because I'm going to keep the cap, remember, right? And I gave him the only answer that I had. And he reached in his pocket and he took out a $5 bill and he said, here's $5. Go find out. We're tired of you treating Alcoholics Anonymous like a joke. And I went and I got my sister and I was like, go get your $5, man. We are out of here. I was like, finally, somebody with some authority knows what I really need around here, right? Oh my gosh, March 14th, 1987, I went out and I relapsed. And I was going to have, right, I was going to have 3 shots and 2 beers. To me, I thought that that would be enough just to get these shoulders off these ears, right? I just wanted to exhale a little bit, you know, I just needed a minute, right? You ever have those days when you just need a freaking minute? Man, I just needed a minute. And I thought 3 shots and 2 beers could deliver me into that moment. And I would just stay right there. Right? I'm not going to drink the whole bottle. I'm not going to cross the tracks. That stuff's not going to happen to me again. Right? I got it. I am. I'm going to change the way I do this thing. And it just, and you know what happens, right? I swallow the stuff and the allergy is triggered and the phenomena of craving is on me. And I can't not have another and another and another and another. And I crawl out of another blackout the next morning. I crawl out of another blackout and into the bathroom. Somehow I made it home. And I'm black and I'm blue and I'm filthy and I'm sick. And I look at myself square in the mirror for the very first time and I hear 2 things. One thing I hear is Mac Shadburn's voice, right? When he handed me the $5, he said, you know, here's $5, go find out. If it doesn't work, you get back here. And the other thing I heard was a voice I didn't recognize, and it was the truth slipping in. And that voice said, you will always drink just like this. That was March 15th, 1987. I walked into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that day. I got there on time. I sat in the middle. I only had 1 cup of coffee. I got in your stupid circle. And when I went to leave the meeting, Mac was standing back in the exit door again. And he looked at me over top of those little reading glasses again on the end of his nose. And he said, did you get a sponsor? And I just looked at him and I went, and he went like this. So back in the room I went, I walked up to every woman, right? Some of it does get through, right? So I walked up to every woman in the room and I said, will you sponsor me? And every woman in there went, oh, no. Oh, honey, no. Right? And so I went to leave and Max said, did you get a sponsor? I said, no one in here will sponsor me. He said, that's a lie. I said, I'm not asking her. And he just went like this. And you know where he was sending me, don't you? Up to talk to Jane, right up in the front of the room. And so now I'm standing up and I have to wait on a line to talk to Jane, right? I'm not a big fan. I'm far too self-centered to wait on a line. But I'm waiting on the line. It's finally my turn to talk to Jane. And Jane is super old. She has white hair. She has it drawn in a really light bun on the back of her head. She smokes cigarettes on an extender. Right. She has the only crystal ashtray in the whole place. The rest of us are using those metal ones that get wobbly on the bottom after you put cigarette butts out in them. And people tend her, right? They carry her into the meeting because she can't do stairs and they place her in her seat and they just, right. And they get her fresh coffee and they tend her. Yeah. And she's just lovely. And so why not tend her, I guess. And so I'm waiting on the line. I finally get up. It's my turn to talk to her. I just look at her and I said, will you sponsor me? And she looked at me and she took the slowest drag off of that cigarette extender. And it took like 7 minutes for her to exhale, right? Right, my perception. And she just looked at me and she said, honey, why should I? I mean, it's a reasonable question, right? Because I've been coming to Alcoholics Anonymous for a couple of months acting really badly. And I just looked at her and instead of telling her where to shove that cigarette extender, which I guarantee you is the only thing I brought to the party, I said, because I need to be sober and I don't know how. And she said, well, in that case, you'll be doing some things differently now, won't you? And I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? Right. And the next day I'm sitting there and I'm acting like I'm doing my homework, but I'm really thinking about the fact that, you know, I've just turned my will and my life over to the care of a bunch of 70-year-olds. Right. And I'm never going to have fun again. I'm never going to smile again. Like, this is ridiculous. Anyway, about 7 o'clock, right, there's this enormous car that comes floating in my driveway. Some of you will remember the Ford LTDs from the 70s. right? They made the list of like the 15 largest cars ever made, right? So one of those cars comes floating in my driveway, right? And like the body is too big for the chassis or something, because when it comes to a stop, it kind of floats a little, right? And then it stops. And this car floats to a stop in my driveway, and I go out and I knock on the window and I said, "Can I help you?" And they said, "Jane sent us, get in the car." And I was like, "No, I'm good. Like, I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous last night. I'm grounded. I'm not allowed to leave the house. I'm not going to go out drinking tonight. I don't need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous." And they said, "Jane sent us, get in the car." And I went in the house and I said, "Ma, AA's here." She was like, "Okay, honey, have fun." And I was like, what is happening to my life right now, right? And I go and I get in the back seat of this Ford LTD, and guys, you can fit 12 newcomers in the back seat of one of those things. You really can't, right? So I'm in the back seat of this car, and off we go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when we get there, we're the first people to arrive, because it is their job to teach me how to set up a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, because they know what I don't know. And what I don't know is that the thing I want more than anything else is to belong to a group of people, to belong to a group of people who actually care about me, to belong to a group of people who can teach me how to live a way of life that is worth living. I don't know that I need all of that, but they know that. And they know that the quickest way to feel like a member of any group is to figure out how to be of service to it. And the way they were teaching me that is they put me in a kitchen with a coffee pot that's about that tall and a can of coffee, and they said, "Put the coffee on." Well, I've never made coffee in my life, especially in a coffee pot that tall. So I'm in there reading the instructions, and they're yelling from the other room. They're like, "Is the coffee on?" And I'm like, "I don't know how to do this. I'm reading the instructions." They said, "Just open the can and dump it all in." I said, "That's not what it says." They said, "Well, that's what we do." And I was like, "Well, no wonder your coffee is so bad." Right. And so anyway, I put the coffee on. And after the meeting, right, we don't just leave after the meeting. No, you got to stand around and talk about stuff I don't care about. And then when all the talking's done, then, right, I have to mop the floor, because there's some kind of spiritual equilibrium that happens with a mop in your hand. Who knew? Right? And we go to leave the meeting, and we're pulling out, and we turn one way instead of the other. And I said, "Fellas, I don't even know really where I am, but I'm pretty sure I live the other direction." Right? And it was as if I wasn't saying anything, because thank God 35 years ago, after meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, you didn't get to go home. You had to go to the donut shop first. And you know what we talked about at the donut shop? Everything we just talked about at the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It all got rehashed, right? If it was a speaker, the inventory got taken, right? If it was some kind of literature meeting, the books came out and hit the table. But that's where the real AA happened. Guys, I didn't get sober in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober in donut shops across Northeast Ohio. I really did. And what I don't know is that they had called an emergency group conscience meetings, and Mac had said, "Look, these girls have got to go. They're ruining Alcoholics Anonymous. They're acting so badly. They're a constant disruption." And he had the whole group, with the exception of one guy, convinced that they just needed to throw us out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was one guy, his name was Bill Long. And Bill Long was one of those old timers who was sober forever, but he never, ever, ever talked, ever. But he was the guy that would post up by the coffee pot. And when you walked in the room and you saw Bill sitting by the coffee pot, you knew that the world was okay and that all things were right. And that was his job, was to show up early and post up by that coffee pot. And he never made a comment, and he never took the podium, ever. But when I would go in and I would get my cup of coffee, I would kiss Bill on the forehead, tell him it was good to see him, and I would know that everything was going to be all right. And Bill was the dissenting voice in the room that night. And they said, you know, like we do in service work, right? You know, does the minority vote want to have the floor? Right. And they all looked at Bill, and Bill stood up. How they tell the story, he stood up, he cleared his voice, he shuffled around a little bit because he was just as uncomfortable as he could have possibly been. And he said, "The way I see it is that God gave us those girls. Therefore, they're our responsibility. We should probably try to put them onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous before throwing them away." And he turned the room on a dime. And Max said, "Yeah, but it says in the big book, if they don't know if they're alcoholic, that they need to go try to control their drinking." And they said, "That's fine, Mac. You can tell them that." And then somebody said, "But what are we going to do with them if they come back?" and somebody said, "Well, they're going to need a sponsor." And one of the guys said, "I have a feeling these girls are pretty badly damaged, and the only folks that are going to have a shot at them are us old folks with white hair." And they all looked at Jane. And Jane said, I don't have the energy to sponsor those girls. And they said, Jane, if you'll take them on, we'll all help. And I had a Monday crew, a Tuesday crew, a Wednesday crew, a Thursday crew, a Friday crew, a Saturday crew, and a Sunday crew. They divided up the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a product of group sponsorship, and I'm grateful for it. There was somebody in my driveway every night at 7 o'clock waiting for me to get in the car. There was always a different donut shop, and they knew where they were picking me up from. They knew that we didn't have any money. And they always bought me a cup of coffee and a donut after the meeting. They let me bum as many cigarettes as they had. They never asked me for gas money. And they took me to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And a couple of the old guys, they knew that at some point I was feeling real bad about not having $1 for the basket. And so when they would pick me up and I would get in the back seat, there'd be $1 bill laying back there so I could put it in my pocket so that I could be a part of. And I was placed onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, one step at a time, sitting in donut shops around Northeast Ohio. And they sponsored me out of the big book in the 12 and 12, which wasn't really widely used here 35 years ago, right? But they used to have these meetings where they would talk about me, right? And every now and then I'd catch them talking about me. And I heard them one night and a guy says, we have to sponsor her out of the big book because she's so young, she's going to leave us. And when she leaves us, her foundation has to be portable. If she gets sober based on relationships with us, what is she going to do when she goes to college? And so they sponsored me out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous so that my foundation in AA would be portable. And I'm so grateful that they did. They delivered me into the arms of God by demanding that I pray. Right? I had a couple of groups when they would come get me. They were my Tuesday, Wednesday crew. I called them my God squad, right? Because they just talked about God nonstop. Every Tuesday and Wednesday, I was like, oh, here we go talking about God again, right? Like, I was like, I don't even know if there is a God, but if there is a God, I want to stay off of his radar because I've been acting really badly and I don't believe in this forgiveness stuff. I don't know how any of this works, right? I really don't. But they would sit at the donut shop and they would tell me their stories of restoration and forgiveness and resuming a proper place in their families and in the lives of their children and in their work lives because of this power that was flowing through them, because of the power of connectedness and belonging in Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of making amends and actually becoming different people. And they would tell me these stories. And what they did was they suckered me into believing that it could work for me too, right? The power of story. I was getting sober with master storytellers. Like I was hanging on every word because they knew how to describe for me what had happened for them. And I believed them at every turn, right? It's like it's the first true miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous is that we walk in here, a complete stranger tells us to do something and we do it. Right? That's the first miracle, right? And then the second miracle is that you tell me a story that sounds really outlandish, but for some reason I believe you and I believe that it can also happen to me. I mean, just fascinating how this thing works. Absolutely fascinating. And so I started to believe that there probably was a God. And I used to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous in Fredericksburg, Ohio, which is right in the heart of Amish country, right? The very first Amishman to get sober, his name was Mose Yoder, right? Isn't that a great name? Mose Yoder, first Amishman to get sober. He got sober in the late 40s. He was sober for a long, long time. He died in 84. So he died right before I got sober. But he sponsored Danny Shetler, and Danny was the second Amishman to ever be sober, and Danny was still around back then, right? What I have come to realize is that I was actually sobered up by second generation AA members, right? There was still one guy who was part of the initial 100 who was still shuffling around when I got sober. His name was Ed Andy. And every time Ed would walk into a meeting, which wasn't often because he was from the Cleveland area, but whenever Ed would walk into the room, for some reason, I would just go get my ashtray and my cup of coffee, and I would watch where he sat, and I would just go move and sit by him. I had no idea who he was, but I knew that he was important to me. Who knew I was sitting next to a member of the one of the first 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous? Who knew that I was getting, sobered up with second generation folks, right? And why is that important? Right? It was important to me because they had the message that had depth and weight, and they were delivering it in a way that made sense to me, that spoke to my heart. And they delivered me into the arms of God by taking me to these meetings in Amish country, right? And so Danny he had this ongoing argument with this guy named Jeremiah, and Jeremiah would drive down from the big city, right, of Akron, right? Jeremiah would drive down to those meetings, and the two of them had this fight that went on for a couple of months because Jeremiah had a rock for a higher power, and Danny just thought that he was an idiot. And he would say that out loud, right? It was a speaker meeting, of course, because most of the meetings around here are, thank God, right? Power of story. So we would sit there, during the speaker meeting, and after the meeting was over, especially on the last Thursday of the month, it was pie night. And on pie night, all of the Amish would make homemade pies. And so the meeting in Fredericksburg would be very large on the last Thursday of the month because, you got to go to Amish pie night. But anyway, after every single meeting, we'd be sitting around drinking coffee and eating whatever treats they had brought for us. And Danny and Jeremiah would start to argue about God. And literally, Danny would look at Jeremiah and say, that rock, it's not power. That rock has no power. That rock cannot get as big as you're going to need it to get when things in your life really happen. Like, you're just an idiot if you believe that rock is going to keep you sober. And Jeremiah says, it says in the book that I can have my own concept of God, and this is my concept of God, and this rock doesn't have to drink every day, and I did. And so this rock knows how to stay sober, and they would just go at it, right? And for me, it was like watching a tennis match, right? I was just fascinated by all of this. And they were arguing about the concept of God. And when they were done arguing at the end of the meeting, they would get up, they would give one another one of those man hugs, right? Where you kind of lean forward and you slap one another real hard on the back, and then you go your separate ways, right? They'd get up, they'd do the man hug slap thing. They would walk away, and I'd be like, the fight's over, right? And the next week they'd pick it up again and they would argue some more. And what they did was they demonstrated for me that there is room in a relationship with God for all of us, that the road to God really is broad, roomy, and all-inclusive, that I don't have to believe the way Danny believes, which is this highly structured, highly religious kind of cultural thing, right, that is the Amish belief system. But I certainly don't have to have a rock for a higher power anyway. And what they taught me is that I can put together a concept of God that works for me. And so I started interviewing members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would ask you, who is your God? What does he look like? What does he do? How does that work? And I would take little bits and pieces from all of you, and I cobbled together a concept of God of my own. And my God squad, right? I would take my problems to the donut shop, and they'd say, did you pray about it? Did you pray about it? Did you pray about it? And finally one night I was like, I don't know how. And they said, give me your book. So I gave them my book, and they opened it up to page 60, and they underlined and highlighted all of the tiny little prayers between pages 60 and 90 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. They closed it, slid it back across the table, and they said, pick one and try it. Right? And another old guy sitting at the donut shop, he said, on your knees, little one. Right? Another miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I go home, I put my big book on the edge of my bed, I get on my knees, and I pray with one eye open so that I don't get it wrong, right? Because when I started in this relationship with God, I didn't know that there wasn't a wrong way to pray. Who knew? Right? They delivered me into the arms of God. They delivered me by placing me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They taught me how to trust the process. And they did it out of the big book and out of the 12 and 12 so that I would always have a guide that went with me everywhere. Guys, oh my gosh, I got sober on the shoulders of giants, on the strength of story, and on the energy of the love. I really did. They kicked me out. I graduated from high school. They made me leave and go to college. I don't have time to walk you through all of that, but I left and I went to college, and they taught me how to show up to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and find a new home group and all that kind of stuff, right? Because they taught me how to, make a commitment, keep a commitment, all that kind of stuff. I said, well, how do I pick a new home group, right? They're not going to be like you guys. And they said, no, they're not going to be like us. They said, but you go to the same meetings every single week, the same Monday meeting, the same Tuesday meeting, every single week. And when you go back, the first time that you walk in the room and somebody remembers your name, make that your home group. Right? And so that's what I did. Wednesday night, Westerville, Ohio became my next home group. And I could walk there from campus, and I went to that home group. And I learned that I could move in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I was getting ready to go to college, one of the old guys, and these are old blue collar folks, right? These are not, well-heeled speakers who travel around on the circuit and deliver powerful messages. God flows, none of that, right? These are just blue collar, standard folks. And one of the retired steel workers, he said, little one, I need you to do me a favor. And I said, yes, sir, anything, right? I would do anything for them. And he said, I want you to go live a really big life. He said, I've never left here. I want you to go live a really big life. He said, every time somebody gives you an opportunity, if it's not going to get you drunk, pregnant, or thrown in jail, I want you to say yes. Doesn't that sound like an AA promise, right? If it's not going to get you drunk, pregnant, or thrown in jail, I want you to figure out a way to say yes. He said, will you do that for me? And I said, yes, sir, I'll do that. And guys, I'm sitting here, I'm 35 years sober. I've lived in 13 different places. I've lived coast to coast and north to south, and I've experienced Alcoholics Anonymous all over the place. I've got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I've worked for the United States Marine Corps, for the Department of Energy, major airports. I mean, I wrote the initial pandemic plan, so there really was a playbook because I wrote part of it. I mean, I've just gotten to do this, and I've had this amazing career that's taken me all over the place. And I'm here to tell you that AA is alive and well all over the country. They don't do it right everywhere. There are a couple of places, I will never live there because they do AA wrong, but I was able to hold my tongue long enough to stay sober while I was there, and maybe even be of service a little bit here and there, right? But I've had this incredible life. And what I know today is that my sobriety has been a series of surrenders, right? I had to surrender to the idea that I had alcoholism. And then I had to surrender to the fact that the treatment for my alcoholism was the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I had to surrender to the idea that if I didn't deepen and expand my relationship with God, that I was not going to have the spiritual footing I would need for an ongoing, successful life. And every single time more has been revealed, that means that I have had more to surrender, and more and more and more. I've had to surrender all kinds of things throughout my life, right? And there have been incredible joys and incredible sorrows. I've had to surrender who I was married to. I've had to surrender whether or not I was married. I had to all kinds of things have had to be surrendered throughout my sobriety. And I have had to heal. I have had to heal that relationship with that father of mine, right? God love him. He's still drinking today. He had to move into this old people's low rise kind of thing, right? And he's had some strokes, and he's got gout in both, and he's got cirrhosis, and he's just a wreck, right? Because he's an alcoholic who's never gotten sober. And when he moved into there some years ago, I mean, he was taking his little scooter up and down the hallways calling people names, right? So he moved in, and they started a petition to get him to move out, right? And I remember when I was a little kid, right, he was standing in the kitchen yelling at my mom, and he's pointing at my sister and I sitting at the little kid table, and he said, I don't know why you spent money on them for school clothes. They're never going to amount to anything anyway. Right? And I just remember looking at him, and my sister, I remember her folding into herself and taking that on board and believing it. And I sat up straight and I looked at him, and my thought was, how can somebody so big be so wrong? Right? And I'll show him. Right? And so, and I had to come to terms with the fact that so many of the decisions and the way I made those decisions in my life was about showing people up, right? And showing people what I could do. Oh my gosh, right? And so I had to surrender all of that too. And I had to, and one day I was just delivered into this understanding that I'm a precious child of God, and I am here to do his work. Right? And I've had to get outside help to work through those disappointments, and to work through the abandonment that I felt when I was a little kid, right? The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are incredibly healing, right? But sometimes we need just a little something extra. And I've gotten that little something extra, because I'm not one of those people that believe when people say, oh, well, we're alcoholic, we're always going to be sick. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not a message of hope that I want. I want to be well. I want to be healed. I want to walk down any street, and I want to look every human being I meet in the eye. My sister, she never did come back into AA or NA or any of that kind of stuff. And she called me some years ago, and she's bawling, right? And I was like, oh my God, like, who died? Right? And she doesn't come around, so she doesn't have our language. And she said to me, she said, I want what you have. And I said, well, what do I have that you want? And she said, I watch you. She said, you walk into any room you want when it's full of people, and you just assume that you belong there, and you assume that everybody's going to like you. She said, you are fearless. And I was like, oh my God, like what a change you guys have given me. What a change. Remember, I'm the little kid with my shoulders on my ears and my little hands balled up in fists because I'm terrified all the time. And today I walk into any room that I want and I look all of you in the eye and I assume I belong there. And I know that if I'm in that room, it's because I'm supposed to deliver an experience of God into it. He's got some work for me to do in that room. And so I walk up to you, I put out my hand and I said, my name's Deb and I'm alcoholic. Or my name's Deb and I'm running for office. Or my name's Deb and I'm here to change the way you work operationally. And I get busy doing the work that God's given me. What an incredible life this is. What an incredible life. I have a million stories. I don't have time. But I could literally sit and tell you stories forever. Yeah, I just couldn't be more grateful to be one of you. Thank you very much for my life. Thank you for delivering me into the arms of God. And thank you for putting up with me long enough for me to act right in Alcoholics Anonymous. Glenn, thanks for the invitation to share with you this afternoon.